Hello, my name is Mohan Kelkar and I teach petroleum engineering. This is a video series about energy reality and this is the first video of my series. Just few months ago, we finished COP26, which was a climate change conference in Glasgow, London. This was the 26th COP conference, and in this conference, many nations agreed to phase down the coal usage. They also committed themselves to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. They committed more climate finance to developing countries and also recommitted to keeping the global temperature rise to about 1.5 degrees Celsius or 3 degrees Fahrenheit compared to pre-industrial levels. This was not the first conference. Conference of Parties, or COPs, have been held under the auspices of United Nations. And in each of those conferences, nations and their leaders meet to discuss the challenges faced by the climate change and how to mitigate them. The first COP was held in 1995 in Berlin, Germany. And since that, every year a COP has been held. In every one of those COPs, new pledges to combat climate change are made, including the last one in Glasgow, England. The reality, though, is quite different. This graph has three pieces of information. One piece of information relates to amount of fossil fuel consumption over the last 30 years. The another one is related to the percentage of the energy which is provided by the fossil fuels. And then it also shows different times over which these COP conferences have been held. What we do see here is that the energy consumption for using fossil fuel has been increasing steadily. There are many units of energy I can use: terawatt hour, exajoules, BTUs, but those units are not that intuitive. Instead, I use the unit of the amount of energy consumed by New York City. New York City consumes about 50 terawatt hour per year. So what you can see from this graph is that over the last 30 years, we have added about 1,000 New York cities worth of energy by consuming more fossil fuel. But not only that, when you look at the percentage of the energy which is provided by the fossil fuels, it has approximately remained at 80% over the last 30 years. Not only that, if you look at the last 50 years of data, you'll find that the fossil fuel has provided about 80% of the world's energy. This is not to discredit many countries' genuine efforts to actually reduce the fossil fuel consumption. There is no doubt that when you look at the temperature rise over the last 150 years compared to pre-industrial levels, the temperature has risen by about 1 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit over the last 150 years. And not only that, when you examine the amount of CO2 which is emitted in the atmosphere and its concentration and the temperature rise, you see a strong correlation between the CO2 increase as well as the temperature rise. Now, where does this CO2 come from? Well, the CO2 concentration has increased because we are consuming a lot of fossil fuels over the last 150 years. So as the amount of fossil fuel consumption increases, the CO2 concentration increases, which is a main contributor to greenhouse gas. Now, if indeed the fossil fuels are contributing to the global temperature change, why is that there has been no movement to reduce the fossil fuel consumption in the past 30 years despite of all the COP meetings? So there are certain questions which are worth asking. Why is it so difficult to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels despite our efforts to reduce the fossil fuel consumption? Why is it so difficult to replace fossil fuels with alternate sources of energy? Are there sufficient incentives to reduce the fossil fuel consumption? And is there an alternate pathway that we can take than the one we are currently pursuing? In this upcoming video series, I want to provide answers to some of these questions. I believe that we can understand the answers to these questions, we may be able to reach a different solution path than the one we are currently pursuing. This video series is not intended to be either political or partisan. Instead, I hope I can provide you with facts and figures which offer explanation to the questions I have posed. I hope you enjoy it.